I'm Alec Baldwin, and you're listening to Marketing Trends, and the leads aren't weak.
Every marketer is looking for that magic channel, the one space where it feels like everything resonates perfectly with your audience and your message cuts through the noise. More often than not, though, finding a hybrid, thought-out, multi-channel approach is the true secret formula for success.
I won't say that there's an individual channel that works really well. What I will tell you is that we have found multi-channel communications is incredibly effective. If you're sequencing them in a thoughtful way, I think the answer is because we're not finding a single channel on its own is going to be make or break.
That's Rahul Kak, Executive Director of Behavior Change Marketing at CVS Health. On this episode of Marketing Trends, Rahul discusses exactly why a cohesive multi-channel approach is better than being dependent on one avenue and gives marketers reasons to explore that option. Plus, he touches on how marketers can make the biggest impact when it comes to personalization. Enjoy this episode. Marketing Trends Podcast is brought to you by Salesforce. We bring marketing and engagement together. Learn more at salesforce.com/marketing.
Welcome to Marketing Trends. I'm Ian Faison, host of Marketing Trends, and today we have a special guest. Rahul, how are you?
Good, Ian. Good to see you. Hear you.
Yeah, right. We'll see you in here today on our Zoom call. Excited to have you on the show. Excited to be talking about CVS Health and the things that you're doing there and talk your background. So first, how did you get started in marketing?
Good question. I had a pretty circuitous path. I actually did not start there. I started in biomedical and electrical engineering and was testing the waters in things like the medical device industry, NIH. I later transitioned into consulting and actually ended up at my current company now, the Caremark pharmacy benefits component, went back to like school and more consulting. And then I came back to a different business unit, Aetna, which got acquired by CVS. So first off, my career has been full circle by going back to the same company I worked at 10 years ago between other jobs and school. But how I got into marketing was actually just an internship during business school. And it was probably a bit cooler than it is now. It was a space called social media listening. And I did it as like a lark. It was just a weird thing. I thought it was really neat. This is back in probably 2011 or so. And that's how I started. And then when I went into consulting after that, I got into our marketing and sales practice. Had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. So tell me more about your current role as executive director.
So my department is called Behavior Change Marketing. And so think of it like it's more about population health management, even though it sits in a marketing department. And so what we're doing is we take a team of agile cross-functional marketers who are matrixed in with an analytics and data and clinical team members. And what we're doing is we're developing communications to drive behavior change. And so what my role has evolved over time. When we started doing this a few years ago, it was just like kind of an experimental test and learn operating model through like internal partnerships and technologies. We started to stand up Salesforce Marketing Cloud, for example, to enable rapid marketing deployment. And a lot of that is premised on the idea that if our goal is to change behaviors and recognizing that people are stubborn, it's hard to change behaviors, particularly health actions, we need to go in with a mentality where a lot of these things are going to fail and we're going to have to test and tweak and optimize a lot of different things. So my day-to-day now has evolved over the few years. So now, we're at a point where we have a portfolio of scaled programs that, we're budgeted against, we're delivering value. And then, we're continuing to have a portfolio of things that we pilot. And to give you a sense of what that is, it's things such as educating our members on preventable complications, navigating site of care, things they can talk to their physician about, like diagnostic intensity or treatment selection. So, for example, we're not doing anything about educating people about exercising or eating right. That would be kind of in a wellness space, which is separate. Nor are we doing anything, my group doing anything on acquisition or retention work specifically. It's really around empowering people to make better decisions on their healthcare.
I love it. This is super exciting because I think what you're talking about is something that we talk about a lot on this show. which is the helpful side of marketing, right? It's not about, the acquisition or the pulling someone through the funnel or things like that. It's about making your customers' lives better. I know it's, different in what you all are doing than say a B2B company or something like that, but it's about sharing things that are helpful in messaging. So, how do you view this behavior change marketing kind of ecosystem that you're working in? How's your team structured so that you can do this stuff that might be different from a traditional marketing department?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of traditional departments can be siloed in different channels, and that's fine if you need expertise. I mean, to some extent, we still have that. But what we try to do is we try to enable each marketing pod of cross-disciplinary marketers and data scientists, data engineers, and all of these folks. They're intended to be cross-channel from the outset. So you're trying to have a holistic set of tools in which we reach out to people, and they're structured such that we're not taking different verticals within traditional company hierarchies where we're connecting siloed departments by process. What we're doing is we're taking an individual from marketing strategy, marketing operations, marketing technology, creative development, and that includes people who are doing design and writing, take data science, data engineering, clinical experts, and you put them all on one team, or a pod as we'll call it. And we give them this portfolio of work, and they kind of manage against that portfolio, and they will build a set of test and learn initiatives to deliver against their metrics.
I hadn't thought of it before this interview, but or maybe I haven't at some point, but not recently. Of marketing is trying to get people to change behaviors in some way or another. So it's interesting that you call it behavior change marketing. So what are the behaviors that you're trying to change first and foremost? Like, what are the things that people are doing that you don't want them to do?
I'll be cagey on what are those specific behaviors, because some of that will be proprietary. But there's standard things that any payer, and a lot of our value is coming from the payer side of the business or healthcare benefits. So any of these payers, we're all trying to focus on how do you reduce unnecessary ER visits? How do you get people to get their flu vaccine? How do you get people to be adherent to their drugs? So those are the fundamentals. And then, it can extend beyond that to some of those other buckets I had mentioned about, navigating certain site of care that can get very specific depending on whether you need a procedure or some sort of preventable, some sort of diagnostic screening, or you're just managing a chronic condition. What are the best ways to stay healthy? But what are the parts of the health system you have to plug into, and what's the next best action I take in order to do that as a health consumer?
And so what are the types of channels that you're using to do that? How do you reach people?
Yeah, so the biggest channels I would say for us are things like direct mail, email, web, SMS. For these types of messages, and what I described also, you can imagine there's a lot of personal health information, or PHI. So, we have to be thoughtful about that. But, we'll find scenarios where, maybe it makes sense to use give generalized messages through paid digital channels. We'll of course use that. We're using incentives. It's not a channel, but it's a really critical tactic in which we'll reward people with things like gift cards for completing certain health actions. We consider people's providers a channel in which we reach people to the extent we can convince a doctor to enforce or reinforce a behavior change. If we tell them, for this one patient, we're sending them these messages, could you actually send them, could you reinforce that when you meet with them, if you agree with this? And we're actually also activating our CVS retail network as well. So, we have 10,000 stores with pharmacists, and we'll ping messages to our pharmacists to let them know, hey, if there's an Aetna member where we have this data where we can inform something about managing their health or their condition, we can give them some information to share there too. We can print messages on the back of their prescription bags. So of course, we're all balancing this with the right level of appropriateness for the topic, and is this the right channel to deliver to? And that's where a lot of the test and learn comes in, right? Because you don't want to throw 10 channels all at once on this one topic, on this one member, unless you really have a good reason to.
So, what are some of the channels that are working that you've seen that are some of the ones that are? And I know you have proprietary things too that you're working on, but that have worked really well.
Yeah, I would say, what I won't say is that there's an individual channel. That works really well. I think everyone, every marketer wants to say their email or their SMS channel is great because that's incredibly cheap on a per unit basis. Everyone wants to find ways to help the environment and reduce vendor costs by taking down print costs, and, social and search can get, pretty expensive. What I will tell you is that we have found multi-channel communications is incredibly effective. If you're sequencing them in a thoughtful way, if you're also adding, the correct frequency or cadence of communications on those same channels. So it's a bit of a non-answer for you, but I think the answer is because we're not finding a single channel on its own is going to be make or break. And let me give you a comparison. Like traditionally, the way a lot of these messages have been communicated, like help actions, is you have a care manager, you have someone on the phone who is, going to call someone and guide them through a process. Ideally, you have a nurse or a clinician who can do this. That's expensive, and you can't scale that beyond, maybe your top 1 to 5% most sick or chronically ill members. So how do you scale beyond that? And that's where marketing channels come in. And really, we're finding it's going to be a mix. Part of it is also going to be reach. You're not going to be able to get permissions for all of these channels. So you have to find the right combination. So kind of my answer is it's not one, but it's the sum of all the parts.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that, it speaks to the holistic nature of marketing. There's obviously, a plethora of, more channels now than there ever have been. With educating people, with not selling stuff, do you find that the marketing is different? Like what types of engagements are you looking for? What types of actions are you trying to get people to take? How do you know and measure that stuff?
So I think in terms of the actions we're trying to get people to take, I think a lot of it comes down to the data. So there are a few ways you can reach out to people and decide what that is. And we'll have to build business cases against each one. We can reach out through people. Traditionally, it's very deterministic. You have a rules-based model that's identifying, does someone have this condition, yes or no? Are they this demographic or geography, yes or no? And we still do that, but a lot of our programs are built around predictive models. And that's where the investment in data science comes in, where we are building a machine learning model against dozens of data points around an individual. And we say, okay, this is an educational primer that's going to be highly relevant to this person at this point in time. Then it gets down to some of those topics I mentioned earlier, the specific types of behaviors. But the targeting is really critical. I think another key step is activating data around analytically derived archetypes, I'll call it. So kind of cohortizing people based on what we're seeing in those models and clustering them. And that can inform the actual messages we'll send to them, right? Because, you can't be perfectly one-to-one on a lot of these things, but you can at least find sort of clusters within that. And then, when all is said and done, you look at the end of this and you're going to say some combinations of folks that we're reaching out to against these different tactics we're testing against are going to be really effective. And you continue to double down on those, and then you kill the things that aren't working.
Yeah, you started talking about kind of the data science piece of this. Like what types of investments are you all making in data science? How are you leveraging data to increase this messaging?
Yeah, I think the short answer is people. Like you need to have very intelligent people doing this, or you make a choice to either build, buy, borrow. A lot of people will work with third-party vendors that exclusively focus on data science for healthcare payers, providers, plans, et cetera, on this topic. Processing health data and then saying, okay, here is something that you want to do with this health consumer. We've chose a build model. We've built it in-house, and we've built our own production platforms to create these models and run them into our member base. And we have a lot of smart people that are doing these things. It's really interesting that the reason a lot of health plans traditionally don't touch on this topic of reaching out to members, because if you do this indiscriminately, you're inadvertently going to drive up unnecessary utilization. You're going to tell people, hey, you should do this health action, and they're just going to go to the doctor more than they need to. And then that's a big problem in our country, right? People being I'm not going to say over medicated, but overutilizers of healthcare services when they don't need it, or there's certain populations that just need to use it more. But if we're using data to be really targeted about those messages, where there's a real need for it, then we can feel good about doing that, investing in, communications that go out and, even just thinking about, is this worth someone's time to send them a message?
And has there been anything that has kind of surprised you about the data or about some of the things that you've seen?
I don't think so. I think you're going to have to be comfortable with the fact that predictive models aren't perfect. You're going to have some false positives, false negatives, and you have to account for that in the messaging when you don't have 100% certainty that these communications are relevant for the member. And that's fine. You just have to optimize over time against that. Nothing has truly surprised me, other than I think occasionally I'm surprised that certain programs work as well as they do, just because you think it's such a lark where it's that people, particularly highly chronically ill members, are getting a lot of communications reminders from, not just their payer, there's their provider, there's they usually have a care team of other clinicians that are supporting them, friends and family, and you just kind of wonder, is this going to get through? And, I will say I've been pleasantly surprised that certain messages actually have been more accurate than I thought they've been. But, being ready for that, I think, is important, and having messages that are the appropriate level of, I think, not assuming that we're going to get it 100% right. One other area I've been surprised about is what's the right level of incentive that you have to give someone? When I say incentive, I'm talking gift cards in health. And I think we've found that certain amounts aren't necessary to drive this health behavior. And depending on the behavior, you may not even need an incentive at all. And if you talk to a behavioral scientist, they'll even tell you that there's an adverse effect of incentivizing people with money, because you may incentivize them to do that, take this action only one time, but it's not necessarily building the behavior, or even just this kind of intrinsic, building an intrinsic value system around this is the right thing to do to manage your condition, let's say. So I think I've been surprised by some of the results on the effectiveness of health incentives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so what is, I guess, normal for that? Is it normally something where you have those type of incentives to get behavior? Is that a pretty common practice?
Yeah, actually, I don't know how common it is across payers or provider groups. Certainly it can be common when there's quality measures associated with patient care, right? Where there's kind of reimbursements or federal reimbursements. You can think of things like the Medicare STARS program, where plans are incentivized to drive certain behaviors, such as flu vaccinations or preventative screenings. So there's no good playbook on this. And I think results, can be inconsistent. But I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the right specific kind of individuals where this is working. And, that's, based on demographics and other things like, past health action, using behaviors to inform, your targeting models, and therefore which mix of tactics and, incentive levels you're deploying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. So, how has COVID kind of changed the way that you've had to do this stuff? I'd imagine that there were, a ton of changes, obviously, to what people were, worried about and requesting and all that sort of stuff. So I'd imagine, you'd have to evolve your messaging.
Yeah. So when all this happened, we had to drop our pens and stop the presses and just look back at everything we were doing with a certain lens of sensitivity. Is this even appropriate in a world where there's a pandemic? And are we considering the consumer mindset during this period of time? So, obviously a lot of people were choosing not to get elective procedures, and, we'll educate people on that topic, but why educate them about this thing if they're not doing it to begin with, right? And there's a big issue that happens when, and this is very much talked about, it's probably obvious to folks by now, that a lot of people, especially with chronic conditions, were simply not managing their condition or getting the right care because they just didn't want to leave their home. So I think there was a big problem around that. So educating people about, this is the right time to get your care, and in these conditions we were choosing to reach out to people, particularly with, in highly sensitive geographies, and people that, where we had information about their occupation and certain occupations. We know that there's more sensitivities here. We're building models around more sensitive members, obviously mix of chronic conditions and such. So we could encourage them to get certain types of care. there's really long-term negative consequences of people not doing that and holding off on that. And educating people about telemedicine, and it was great to see a spike in that service. I think it's game changing, and hoping it's something that sticks over time.
What about the technology side of things, right? Like I'd imagine that so many people were trying to, people learning how to use Zoom and all these tools and stuff like that. Like, was there kind of like technological barriers that you had to teach people about? And how did you do that?
Yeah, I would say my team wasn't on point for educating people on how to use things like telemedicine. And you have certain providers that have their own platforms for these sorts of things. We, generally speaking, there is a big challenge with technology literacy, and particularly older populations. That's a challenge. So that's not to say that they can't get care through telemedicine, because by the way, that's inclusive of voice-only phone calls. Like that counts in some cases. So I think we certainly have to think about that. We have to plan for that. And we can be thoughtful about targeting the messages to people that, where you could predict if certain groups are going to be less technologically literate, and you could invest more time and resources on educating that group.
So what's next? What are some of the things that you're, excited about for 2021, or things that you're going to be working on to kind of keep pushing this stuff forward?
Yeah, I would say for my department, I think, we're thinking a lot about things like the Medicaid population. You're seeing that's growing, and especially now, like during the pandemic, that's been a growing population. A lot of folks losing their jobs and like shifting to Medicaid. And, I think with increasing like wealth disparity, you're seeing like just like kind of a growing segment there. It's the largest, it's, larger than Medicare. So I think that's an area of big opportunity for all health plans, right? And finding ways to educate them about managing their health, but even just like accessing care. So I'm thinking of my company, and we're expanding our portfolio of health hubs, which are a place where we can, where people can access different health products, and see their pharmacists, minute clinics, care concierges, which are going to be a way to help navigate care. Certain health hubs are going to have behavioral health or maternity products that are very specific, and we're piloting. So I'm excited to find ways to guide certain members that we're able to communicate to, that we know are near some of these new pilot markets, and get them to try out these services. Because I think you look at one of the biggest problems in this country is just lack of, or I guess underutilization of primary care services, and a lot of the problems are that we're finding, and rise of chronic disease is preventable just through a really good primary care service, and finding ways to give people primary care services at a lower cost with a larger footprint is a big part of the mission. So, we're all going to be playing a part in that.
Yeah, I've been actually studying that a little bit recently, and it's pretty shocking. Just like,
oh yeah,
yeah, just talking to some folks in the medical community, specifically around like fetal monitoring, stuff like that. Shout out to Odinata Health out there, our friends over there. But yeah, you look at, kind of, they talk about these maternity deserts, but, it's much the same way in certain areas for primary care, and people just like, not going to the doctor ever. And it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and it's even worse for, you can imagine certain racial groups, certain geographies. You hear a lot about social determinants of health, where people, like, it's not even their first priority. They're just trying to get food on the table. They're trying to, pay their rent. And if health becomes, goes to even the middle, if not the bottom of their list, like that's going to exacerbate tons of problems, and it becomes this vicious cycle.
So, one other thing here before we get out of here. Your team is hiring, is that right?
We are hiring a bit. That is right.
So what do you look for in a teammate?
That's a good question. I think for me, that some of the things I'm really excited about, I think number one is just a really strong intrinsic problem solving capability, because I think healthcare is a place that's famous for its problems. And then the day-to-day work of being a healthcare company, there are a lot of problems. And I think, just finding a way to tackle those, and I would say like a level of grit on that. I think that's just a fundamental skill that I will test for. I think when you get down to specific skills are really critical and certain roles. Like my group is one that has, I would say it has generalist roles, then also specialist roles. And some of the specialist roles, are things like, designers and writers. And it's like a very specific type of skill. And you have a portfolio that you can demonstrate that. And my group also invests in Salesforce Marketing Cloud architects, and finding specialists like that. I mean, you're talking about like a very like niche field, but people that have expertise in things like marketing automation and have familiarity with different technologies related to this and can deploy it in different circumstances, particularly in a highly regulated industry. I think that these are some of the things that level of experience can go a long way.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's the thing. It's like you have these powerful tools that can do these, complex personalization and we didn't even really talk personalization much today, but they can do these things. But, you have to have the talent that can help you not only facilitate the technology, but that can write that stuff, that can create it, that can, make those meaningful connections, that can, ultimately if you can get it in front of the people and it's not worth reading or looking at, then it's not going to be very helpful.
Yeah, totally agree.
So what are some of the greatest challenges in marketing healthcare?
There are a few areas, and it depends what part of the health system you're in, but I'll speak as someone who's part of within a broad integrated system, much more on the payer side. I think number one, brand perception is a big challenge, and people inherently don't trust payers. And, they may not realize that some of the friction they're facing is just based on the certain type of plan that their employer had chose, or even like the level of plan that they were able to choose. There's a very high level of trust for pharmacists, right? So they have like kind of an easier time there, and providers, doctors, and that's where you have you have the actual relationship. So I think if you are on certain parts of the healthcare system, you're going to face a headwind against that. So managing against that is a big piece of that, and trying to think very thoughtfully about your brand strategy. Number two, health literacy is a massive challenge. So we actually target at a 5th grade reading level. That's like, in our brand guidelines. But for my group, that is focusing on educating people about site of care navigation or things that are maybe very specific to their health condition. We're really stretching the rules that we can for that kind of reading level. But I think, finding creative people that can communicate in at a very human-centric way is a real challenge to try to meet. And I think the third thing I'd bring is coordination across the system. And, we're in a world where we're communicating things that have a risk of being out of sync across the multiple doctors or nurses that one of our members sees, or their care manager, their pharmacist, their employer, their pharmacy benefit manager. So, we just have to be aware of that in our communications and, try to find the right balance. And as much as possible, it goes back to kind of data connectivity and what can we connect to know that this is the most relevant message that is also consistent across every other touch point someone has.
Okay, let's get into our lightning round. These questions are fast and easy. Just like marketing with Salesforce, you can go to salesforce.com/marketing to learn more. Salesforce brings marketing and engagement together. I mean, you know this, you're a customer, so I don't have to tell you. But for everyone else out there who's not a customer yet, go check out salesforce.com/marketing. They're the best. We love them. Check them out. Lightning round questions. Rahul, are you ready?
Okay.
Number one, do you have a favorite book or podcast or TV show that you've been binging recently?
Yes, Katie Milkman is a behavioral scientist at UPenn's, I think, Behavior Change for Good group. She has a podcast. I think it's called Choiceology. I should know that, but whatever it is, it's on my autoplay.
How about a habit or hobby that you picked up during shelter in place?
What's really great? Zoom dance classes, because you don't have to commute. You don't have to do, I get very bored with the warm-ups. You just jump right in, and it's a lot of fun. So you can make the space for it, and you don't have anyone looking at you. You just, dance like no one's watching, because no one is watching.
Because indeed, no one is watching. Is there one place that you're going to go or visit, or something that you're going to do when this is all lifted someday?
I really miss hosting events. I am one of those people, I like getting friends together and celebrating. Even my team at work would used to do things at my home, and I'm just gonna go right back into hosting. Looking forward to that.
What's your favorite? Do you got a favorite dish?
I said hosting. I didn't say cooking, but if I had to,
well, you can order it.
I'm pretty. You can order. That's actually true. I'm pretty good at salmon, which I know is really easy, but it's just so good.
What would be your best advice for someone who is heading a marketing group like yourself?
I think be as socialized a leader as you can, and if you're kind of at that level, you probably are fairly socialized. But just build a network. I think depending on the organization, marketers can be more of a shared service, or they can be a leader. In some companies like CPG, they can own the P&L. So I think be self-aware of kind of where you are there, and like stay close to the centers of power, and make sure you have a seat at the table, whether, it's a product-led organization or not.
If you weren't in marketing at all, what do you think you'd be doing?
I really love animals. I have 2 cats. And I would have loved to have been a veterinarian. I think that would have been a really fun way to just see, okay, you're still doing healthcare, right? You're doing it for pets or other animals. I think that could be a really fulfilling job.
Well, that's it. That's all we got for today. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. Well, it's been great having you on the show, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Ian. Take care.
Marketing Trends Podcast is brought to you by Salesforce. Discover marketing built on the world's #1 CRM, Salesforce. Put your customer at the center of every interaction. Automate engagement with each customer and build your marketing strategy around the entire customer journey. Salesforce. We bring marketing and engagement together. Learn more at salesforce.com/marketing.